Clear prop.
Star 73, Yankee number 2, following twin traffic, 3 mile final, clear Sutton. 1 Charlie Bravo, exit in runway 25, going 4 mile final.
This is Behind the Prop with United Flight Systems owner and licensed pilot Bobby Doss and his co-host, Major Airline Captain and designated pilot examiner Wally Mulhern. Now let's go Behind the Prop.
What's up, Wally?
Hey, Bobby, how are you?
Fantastic. This is another week, another good episode for our listeners. Hopefully you are all enjoying Behind the Prop. We love doing the show every week. This week is one that's near and dear to Wally's heart. He's probably used the phrase many times, but this week is all about 2 ears and 1 mouth and why we have 2 ears and only 1 mouth. Wally, tell us why this show idea came to you to do.
Yeah, the idea came to me through doing a lot of check rides and observing, and I started thinking to myself, gee, if the applicant weren't talking so much, they might be listening and they wouldn't be missing things that they're missing because they're talking. And so I started just kind of making a lot of observations, and I would ask people the question. I would say, and not just pilots, but just anybody. I would say, if I told you you had to either lose your ability to speak or your ability to hear, and you had the choice of which one of those senses you had to give up, which one would you give up? And people will think about it for a while, and everybody that I have done this informal poll with says I would give up the ability to speak rather than the ability to listen. So then I would take it one step farther, and I would say, so would you say that listening is more important than speaking? And they said yes, they would. So I took that and I started applying it to aviation. And I think of a flight. What is more important, for me to listen to the radios, for me to listen to the engine, for me to listen to the sounds of the airplane, me to listen to my passengers possibly, or is it more important for me to be talking all the time? And I believe it's more important to listen. And then, you can go back and you say, well, geez, we were, as human beings, we were given with two ears and 1 mouth. So maybe, just maybe, listening is more important than talking.
That's a pretty big dilemma for me. I do like to talk, Wally, and I am a podcaster. So if I lost the ability to talk, I'd have trouble.
That's right.
But I think in the grand scheme of things, the decision is pretty easy overall. I think we'd all like to be able to hear instead of just being able to speak. So what's the problem with people doing more talking than listening? I think you referenced an instrument check ride of late. Talk us through kind of what the abuse was with the too much talking.
Well, when I brief my instrument applicants, when we finish the ground portion and we're getting to the portion where we're going to go get in the airplane, we're going to go fly, I mention to my applicant that, and again, we're specifically talking about an instrument check ride. I say that there's very likely going to be some times of awkward silence in the airplane. In other words, when we are interacting with air traffic control, and maybe we're being vectored for an approach, or maybe we're in a holding pattern or something like that, there are going to be times where your entire focus is flying a heading and flying an altitude, or maybe tracking a radial or a course. And I think a lot of applicants just are not used to that. They're used to a training environment where the instructor is always talking. If there's a dead spot, I think most CFIs feel like it's an opportunity to teach, and they need to be talking the entire time. We've had this discussion before that airplanes don't make very good classrooms. They're noisy, they're hot, they're cramped, and there's a lot of external things going on. So an airplane is not the ideal classroom or briefing room, if you will. But I believe that a lot of CFIs just feel like they have to be saying something all the time. And I think sometimes it's best to let what you say sink in to the student. And so I think the students take that, they get to a check ride, and they feel like they just need to tell me everything. And I tell them. Now some examiners may want that. And we're talking about, we're not talking about CFI rides where you are actually teaching the examiner. We're talking about check rides where you're just trying to demonstrate your ability. If you look in the ACS for instrument check rides, for basically every approach, it says demonstrate single pilot resource management, or SRM. And if you're going to go out and take your mother for an airplane ride tomorrow, and you're going to go fly an instrument approach, are you going to brief your mother on the approach? Are you going to tell her what the inbound course is, what the minimum descent altitude is, or the decision altitude, or what the missed approach procedure is? I don't think you are. I really don't think you are. But most of the flight schools teach the students to brief the approach. The fact is that in the ACS, it doesn't say anything in the ACS about briefing an approach. I don't think it's a bad idea. I don't think it's a bad idea at all, but it is a technique. And it's a technique that most of pretty much anybody I've given an instrument check ride to wants to brief me on the approach. And I've heard all different kinds of briefings, anywhere from a 30-second briefing to 3 or 4 minutes. The fact is that when you're talking, you're probably not listening. And if we're in an ATC environment, that can present problems, because now you're missing calls, you're missing turns, you're missing altitude changes, you're missing approach clearances, and so forth. So sometimes less is more, and I think this is an example of maybe speaking less is more.
I know you know this, but don't you feel at some level pilots that are being administered a check ride to want to show you that they have the knowledge and information? Do you think that's part of this talking during a check ride, that applicants are trying to show their worth, or their, hey man, I've spent all this money and time to learn all this stuff. You're the first person that's really, getting to see me in action. I got to show it off, right?
Yeah, I do. I think that's a part of it. I just don't know, how are they going to be tomorrow when they go out and they take someone for an airplane ride? Is there going to be all this extra chatter? I don't know. I really don't know. I can't answer that.
I'm pretty shocked that it's not in the ACS too. I think I would have assumed. I haven't read the ACS in a while. I passed my check ride a few years ago. But you mentioned CFIs and the teaching environment where we're always making sure we are validating the date that the plate's good. We're starting in the top left, and assuming we're using FAA charts, and we're reading radio numbers, we're tuning those in. We're trying to get that flow down. I think I do it in my head, whether my mother-in-law's in the plane or I'm by myself, right? I'm doing something to brief to make sure that I'm obviously using an accurate and valid plate. But I think you're just saying that you're not going to be telling a DPE or a person that's in your plane all the steps that it's going to take to make the approach a successful approach. Right.
And some DPs may want someone to verbalize that. I think as a CFI, you're constantly, you're as a CFI, you're a little bit of you're a bit of an instructor, but you're also a little bit of a check pilot too, especially when it gets down toward the end of their training. I mean, you're testing your student a little bit. And how do you know what's going through your student's mind unless you make that student verbalize it? Okay, so I think that... Go ahead.
In the past, we've also talked about the letting people make mistakes, having instructors give that breathing opportunity for there to be a mistake, right? I think if we're constantly repeating and reading and correcting, then maybe we don't have the opportunity. Maybe a challenge for CFIs would be to not talk as much, to go shoot an approach with almost a sterile cockpit and observe, and then provide some feedback and coaching after the fact.
Yeah,
you might find that there are a lot better pilots when they're not talking as much.
Yeah, and an excellent opportunity for that is in a simulator. I mean, obviously we don't want to hurt anybody. We don't even want to hurt an airplane. You know, we don't want an aircraft accident or incident, and God forbid we don't want to hurt anybody. So a simulator is the perfect example for that, because you can crash a simulator, and guess what? You don't hurt anybody, and you don't hurt any equipment. So, you know, although a simulator is a better classroom, it's easier to talk. That might be the opportunity to really not say anything. Let them go down and you know, go below minimums. It's a circling approach, and you use straight in approach minimums or something like that. You know, let them make that mistake. And that's an excellent debrief item. Say, hey, that did not meet the standard. Let's not even talk about the tower that's out here on this side. That's the reason that the minimums may have been higher. Yeah, I mean, from what I have found, if people are talking, in general, they're not listening.
Yeah, I think the instrument, if I reflect back to my time that I was an instrument student, you know, you go from flying the pattern over and over and over again, talking an awful lot at a towered airport, making a lot of radio calls at a non-towered airport, that the instrument training becomes very awkward, because you do a lot of straight and level flying, you do a lot between approaches, and I think your instructor's trying to do as much teaching as they can in that. But you do get to this point where you're not really communicating on the radio as much as you were before, that it does create a chatterbox inside the cockpit, more for education, but it is something that when you really do instrument flying, it's not realistic. It's not how you're going to fly the aircraft.
Right.
You're not going to do all of that communicating. So kind of unique to instrument and instrument flying. What about other phases of flight or other phases of your aviation career where maybe talking has become a bad thing and people aren't listening enough? One that jumps to my mind that I see happen when I ride or fly with other people is the taxi phase of a flight. It's gets too relaxed, we'll put it that way.
Yeah, and especially airports where you're familiar. And you know, one situation we have at Hooks Airport is we have a lot of cars driving around. Yeah, and they're supposed to give way to the airplanes, but sometimes they don't. I would just assume give way to the car and not crash than crash and it be the car's fault.
No doubt. Please abide by that guideline for sure. And a lot of times they dive in and out of taxiways and spots to go because they think they're more mobile and can get there quicker. But not only the cars, people walking, you don't know if wildlife's going to be on the taxiway. I have heard of an incident where there was really two pilots, both were commercial pilots, and they the person flying actually wrote down a clearance and they bent a plane when that could have been easily done by the person that was in the passenger side of the cockpit, first officer side of the cockpit. I think you got to be smart and you got to define these things before you start moving the aircraft. If we're going to act like a crew, let's do this. You own these pieces, I'll own these pieces. Let's both watch. Let's both have our heads on a swivel and make sure we don't run into something. It's just such a, I hate to say it, but it's a simple phase of flight where we should never have incidents, but it seems like a lot of little things happen that create problems because we get a little too relaxed. And as you said, at an airport where I've flown 150, 200 flights at, to know that I'm probably going to go to the Delta ramp for a run-up, that I'm probably going to go to that Delta ramp via Juliet Echo Papa, and I've heard those hundreds and hundreds of times, you get this expectation bias of what you're going to do, and that alone is a slippery slope that you don't want to get caught off guard and go to the wrong place.
Right. You know, go ahead.
I was just going to say that goes back to the listening part. Like if you listen and you consume it, you don't have that expectation bias, then you will go to the right place.
Yeah. You know, so many times we land at our airport, we land on 17 right, we exit taxiway Echo and before I even talk to ground, I'll hear an airplane coming out of a different area of the airport. And just by me hearing that airplane call ground, I know that we've got a potential conflict. He's coming from where I want to go, and the taxiway will only fit one airplane. So already before ground even talks to us or talks to him, I'm beginning to think, okay, that somehow this isn't just going to be a taxi to parking instruction from ATC. So again, this comes from listening. If I'm talking and doing whatever as I clear that runway and not listening, then when ground control gives me the instructions to hold short of here or taxi over here to get out of the way of this other airplane, you know, if I'm listening, I'm already kind of on the same page with them.
Yeah, that's a pro skill. Like I don't think your private candidates are thinking that way the day that they're passing their private check ride, right? So
I'll definitely not.
Where do you think that begins to take hold? Obviously, with practice of listening, you'll get better at those things, but that's a situational awareness thing that you can only gain by learning how to listen. But do you think your instrument students are thinking that way? Does it take to commercial to have that level of situational awareness?
I would think by the time they're a commercial pilot, I would hope that they would. I would hope there would be some sort of awareness with that and listening to the other airplanes. I flew yesterday from Washington, D.C. to Los Angeles, across the country, and for 2/3 of the flight, we were behind another airplane. And, you know, we figured it out. And I figured out that, hey, he's heading the same direction. He's in front of us because I kept hearing their call sign. And so after about 2 center handoffs, when they told him to contact Albuquerque Center on 127.92, I knew that about 5 minutes down the road, I was going to be calling Albuquerque Center on 127.92. So when I heard them give it to him, I reached down in the standby of my radio and tuned in 127.92. And sure enough, he went all the way to L.A. He landed right in front of us in Los Angeles. And, you know, for 2.5 hours, I was behind him. And just by listening and knowing that, you know, I gained some situational awareness. I basically knew what frequency I was going to. All I had to do was hit the button to transfer from the standby to the active side.
All by listening, all making yourself a much safer pilot, making the flight go smoother, just being ahead of the aircraft and ahead of the communication.
Right.
What do you think? Let's go back to that private student, I guess, or that private applicant. Why do you think they talk more than they should? Do you think it's the nerves? Do you think it's they're trying to impress? What do you think is the bearing factor on why a private applicant or a private student might be talking more than they should?
Well, I think part of it is nerves. I think a lot of us, when we get nervous, we talk. I call it oral diarrhea. Just stuff starts coming out of the mouth that maybe shouldn't come out of the mouth. You know, and I
That's
hear
never
that
really good for a check ride either, right? I mean,
probably not. I mean,
the volunteer stuff.
ATQ, answer the question. So many times, I'll ask an applicant something, and it'll be a yes or no question, and they tell me no, and then they go down a rabbit hole. And sometimes when they get down in that rabbit hole, things come up that they maybe don't know. Maybe I wasn't even going to ask them. But since we're here, let's talk about this. So, just answer the question. And if I want more, I mean, I'm a trained professional. I know how to do check rides, and I think I do a fairly decent job at it. If I want more information, I'll ask you for more information. But yeah, I think, and we see this on the pre-flight. I mean, we get out there, and I'll tell them. I'll say, I don't need you to tell me anything. Just do your pre-flight the way you would normally do it. And if I have a question, and I will ask questions, I'll say, what is that antenna? Okay, that's the ELT, or how much oil do we have? What's our maximum amount of oil? I will ask questions, but I don't need you to go through and tell me everything.
So, student pilots, we're talking a little bit all around the different ratings, but student pilots, I would say I very rarely meet a student pilot that doesn't say I have trouble with the radios, right? And I was a dispatcher many, many years ago in law enforcement, and they kind of just came naturally to me, but not everybody's got that. Student pilots, the only suggestion that I've really been able to share really is to practice, that they really need to know their tail number. That seems to be, if you can get to the tail number and I guess repeat it to yourself, whatever. If you can hear the tail number, you can pretty much hear ATC's instructions if you're listening. I think the best way to practice is probably listen to Live ATC. It's liveatc.net. There's an application for phones that you can listen to a lot of airports. Specifically, you can listen to this airport and listen to tail numbers and try to track in your brain what that tail number's doing. If you want to get a little bit more sophisticated, go to FlightAware and then watch that plane fly the pattern or go depart and listen for the tail number and kind of visualize in your mind where they're at, what they're doing, what they're hearing. Try and pick one tail number and follow it until it changes channels. Maybe borrow a handheld radio if you don't have one. Listen to a radio station that you can practice being a tail number, hear all the instructions, write those instructions down if that would help you practice. Ask a friend to help you pretend to be an air traffic controller. And it just takes practice to be able to listen and hear what you need to hear. It will change your career, your efforts of being a pilot, the sooner that you can catch the radios. I've seen a great example of instructors at this school go out into the hangar, big open vast space covered so it's not too hot, not rainy, and walk the pattern and talk to a student. So they walk as if they're in the pattern, and make the radio calls and have the student practice those things. It's a way to just, again, practice makes perfect, and do those things as a student pilot, and you will get better with the radios. It just takes a little bit of time.
Yeah, the one thing I would caution is when you do listen to Live ATC, there's a lot of bad radio etiquette out there. And you've got to, just because a guy flies a really fancy corporate jet doesn't mean that he's doing it the right way. And why is it a big deal? Why is it a big deal that we say left turn 060 rather than left turn to 60? Talking to a domestic controller, it's probably not that big of a deal. What we want is effective communication. But if you have aspirations to fly professionally, at some point you're probably going to fly outside of the borders of the United States. And you're going to fly in foreign countries. And we're very fortunate that English is the worldwide aviation standard. But that doesn't mean that the controller that you may be talking to, their native language may be something else. And you may be flying over the Amazon jungle down in Brazil in the middle of the night, and you're talking to a Brazilian controller whose native language is Portuguese, and they know some aviation English, and so using correct terminology is pretty important. So the philosophical question that I will sometimes pose to applicants, I will say, if something is not right, is it wrong? So climb and maintain 10,000. You read back, climb and maintain 10,000. Is it right? Well, the book says that we're supposed to call it 10,000, not 10,000. So I wouldn't say it's right, but is it wrong? I'm not sure I would say it's wrong either. It's kind of a gray area. But just have discipline with yourself. One phrase I hear a lot from applicants on check rides is when they need ATC to say something over again, they will ask them to repeat. Would you repeat for Cessna 123? And actually the phraseology is say again. Is it that big a deal? It's not that big of a deal, but what the book says is say again. So let's try to stay within the confines of the book.
Yeah, we were going to talk a little bit about commercial pilots, and I think they might be the ones that do get a little too cute. They use incorrect phraseology more often than not, and I think those pilots that do that, you got to know there's students listening, and they want to emulate you, they want to copy you, they want to be like you, and I think the more that we eliminate that, the better we help the future aviators not go down those bad habits, for sure. I think kind of the private student, I guess we're a private pilot now, we've learned how to fly. What do I do to practice? So you've probably gone through all those things we did for student pilots, but I think you need to have a flow of your listening. Like, how does your flight work? The better you plan, the better you should know. You should know if you're going to go cross country, you're going to be handed off. You should have some mechanism by which you capture the information and you use that information and you put it into the tools in the cockpit. When I took my check ride with Wally a number of years ago, the one of the debrief items was maybe I wrote down too many things, and was it really necessary for me to write everything that I wrote down? And I took that to heart, and I stopped writing some of the radio changes down, and I started anticipating when I heard my tail number and that said to switch, that I was reaching for the radio and I was tuning the standby. And I think when you're a student pilot, there's just so much information coming, you're probably not able to do those things. And as the workload subsides or your skills get stronger, you're able to hear your tail number and they say switch to tower 118.4. You're already reaching for the radio and you're tuning for that. You can look at the standby, you recall the standby that's in there, and then you switch it over after they tell you that they don't tell you you're on the wrong radio station or wrong radio channel. I think those things make flying so much more easy, and it is a skill of listening. So when you coming into a controlled airport and you know you're going to get a squawk code, be ready to put that squawk code in. When you request entering their airspace and you tell them what you want to do, when you get to that airspace, they're going to give you a squawk code. Be ready to enter that squawk code. You don't have to write that squawk code down. Maybe you do when you're a student, but you don't have to once you get a little bit better at listening. And the more of those things that you can incorporate into your listening and doing, the better off you're going to be. And the last thing I wanted to talk about was that awkward silence. Wally, we've all been flying. There's been this moment where it's quiet. Could be an IMC, could be just a pretty day outside. What is my initial reaction is I should be doing something. I think others start talking and carrying on. What are your thoughts when there's the check ride being administered and there's an awkward silence? What do you, I don't know if you're expecting something from the applicant, but what do you want from an applicant?
I want them to do what's appropriate, and sometimes what's appropriate is to do nothing.
That's right. I think for me, I could do a checklist.
Right.
I could could listen to some weather somewhere.
Yeah.
I could figure something out. I could talk to myself about what I think I'm going to do when I get to the next phase of flight, whatever that phase would be, descend, whatever. Maybe I'm doing some mental math and some paper math on, okay, if I'm doing 100 knots and I'm at 8,500 feet, how do I get down to 1,500 feet, which is pattern altitude at the airport I'm going to? That's 6,000 feet, 7,000 feet that I need to lose.
Right.
How long is it going to do? That's 500 feet per minute. I'm doing some of these things that if I didn't do them in my pre-flight planning that I need to do in the air, I'm doing something. I almost take awkward silence as a time to do, not a time to talk. And I think that makes you a better pilot as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Going back to the writing things down, I think most CFIs teach their students to write everything down. And, writing down a squawk code, when you listen when ATC says squawk 1, 2, 3, 4, so you write down 1, 2, 3, 4 on a piece of paper. Now you have to transfer 1, 2, 3, 4 from that piece of paper to the transponder. When they say squawk 1, 2, 3, 4, if you can just go straight to the transponder, you're just basically eliminating the middleman. So instead of 2 transactions, it's now 1 transaction. So we have cut our exposure to error in half.
Which is very beneficial if you wrote down the wrong number.
Right.
You get the chance to let them hear it from you and then hopefully correct you.
Yeah. And, a lot of CFIs are going to disagree with this. They still want their people to write down everything. And I'm not saying that that's wrong. It's absolutely not wrong. But I can also say that multi-engine airplane out there is twice as likely to have an engine failure as a single-engine airplane. I'm still going to take the multi-engine airplane over the single-engine airplane any day of the week to go fly from a safety standpoint. But just think about it. There's 2 engines, so there's twice the opportunity for an engine failure.
All right, well, hopefully you got something from this episode. Hopefully you're listening to all of our shows. Hopefully you're liking our shows and sharing it with your friends. As always, fly safe and stay behind the prop.
Thanks for checking out the Behind the Prop podcast. Be sure to click subscribe and check us out online at BehindTheProp.com. Behind the Prop is recorded in Houston, Texas. Creator and host is Bobby Doss. Co-host is Wally Mulhern. The show is for entertainment purposes only and is not meant to replace actual flight instruction. Thanks for listening, and remember, fly safe.